Good morning, AP class. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the war in the Pacific. Now, I know you've all had at least some information on this, so I'm going to kind of skip over some things and kind of focus on some of the big ideas. So, first of all, what would possess the Japanese to go to war with the United States thousands of miles away? The reality is that no matter how strong the Japanese Navy was, the U.S. was in position to do a lot of damage if it chose to enter the war at a bad time. For example, had the U.S. chosen to attack Japan when it had invaded Manchuria or Korea, then that could have put a serious hurt on the Japanese. They took that risk knowing that the U.S. probably wasn't going to, but it was in the back of their minds. The other reason is, and if you look, let's see if I can I spotlight this? There we go. Yes, there we go. If you look here, you have the U.S. colony in the Philippines. Remember, we'd taken that from Spain. Out in here, you had places like American Samoa, Midway, Wake. These are all colonies of the United States. You have Hawaii here. You have Alaska up here. The Japanese felt fairly hemmed in by the U.S. Navy. Their concern was that if the U.S. chose to get involved, the U.S. might choose to bypass attacking Japan directly and just interpose itself here in this strait and effectively block Japan's access to its resources and conquered territories. This was a serious concern for the Japanese. This concern has not gone away, by the way. If you notice, the Chinese today have spent a lot of time building Air Force bases on, homemade islands all through this section in the last 5 or 10 years. And the reason for that is exactly the same. They don't want the United States Navy to come in and be able to take control of this home waterway away from them. And I can't really blame them for that. Okay, so getting back to World War II. So this is a big part of the reason. Now, the other reason is that the U.S. had embargoed Japan. While we had chosen not to go to war with anybody, we had stopped selling important stuff to aggressive powers, essentially. People we said were aggressive powers, and spent a lot of money giving money and equipment to the Russians and the Brits and the French, who we sympathized with. The problem for Japan is Japan does not have a good native source of oil, and its native resources in iron are pretty thin. The U.S. was its primary source of both. And so the concern was that if the U.S. had stopped selling them oil and they didn't come up with a new source of oil very quickly, their whole expansion effort could grind to a halt. That's a big part of why they chose to attack Pearl Harbor, because if they immobilize the U.S. Navy and it can't interfere, then they have a pretty good shot at taking over more territory in Southeast Asia, the Dutch East Indies, eventually getting Australia, all places that have resources they need, especially Australia. Australia is full of metals. Part of why the Battle of Coral Sea is fought is that the Japanese sent a fleet to attack Australia, and we stopped it. One, because we like kangaroos, but two, because we were concerned that if the Japanese could take out Australia, they could gain a lot of resources, and we didn't want to do that. Okay, anyway. So you've got this idea of control of trade and control of sea lanes. The Japanese are utterly dependent on sea lanes to get everything. They did not want to be in a position where the U.S. could cut them off, which is, by the way, how the war would end. The U.S. embargo definitely tipped the Japanese in favor of attacking the United States. So we have this attack on Pearl Harbor, which is here in Hawaii. Why attack Pearl Harbor? Well, Pearl Harbor is the primary naval base for Central and Eastern Pacific. The main fleets that defended this region were parked in Pearl Harbor. The reason why attack secretly, you attack secretly because you need utter surprise. If the U.S. disperses those ships and they attack an empty base, then they've gone to war with the U.S. and have no advantage. The reason the Japanese planned a sneak attack was that they intended to destroy the U.S. fleet first and make it so that they could easily defend the Eastern Pacific and do what they wanted in China. There was never a credible plan for Japan to invade the United States. That wasn't really in the cards. That wasn't what they were thinking. Maybe Hawaii, but other than that. By attacking Pearl Harbor and by eventually going after Dutch Harbor in Alaska and attacking, places like Midway and Wake, they were trying to push the American Navy out of contention so that they knew that they could always access their colonies. That's why Pearl Harbor. Now, why didn't Pearl Harbor work? Yes, it was a horrific attack. It killed many people. It sunk many ships, and it was a complete failure. The reason is that by World War II, the battleship, the big scary boat of its time in World War I, had become basically obsolete. A battleship has a range of 20-ish miles at the outside. An aircraft carrier can launch an attack from hundreds of miles away. The aircraft carrier is going to become the ship of World War II. The battleship stopped being made after World War II because they just weren't useful anymore. They make great museums, but other than that, they're not good for much. So there's the incentive for the Japanese was not to take out the battleship fleet, but was to take out the carrier fleet. The reason Pearl Harbor is a failure is that the carrier fleet was not at Pearl Harbor. It was out. It was out in training, and its support ships, the ships that are required for it to function and protect them, were all out. What was left in Pearl Harbor was largely old World War I, pre-war era battleships. And again, it was a horrible loss of life, and I don't want to minimize that, but the attack was a failure. It did not seriously impede the American military's ability to make naval warfare in the Pacific. Japan, I would make the case that Japan basically lost the war when Pearl Harbor was unsuccessful. All right. So that's Pearl Harbor. What allows Pearl Harbor is new technologies. We've got long-range fighters. We've got aircraft. We have radar. We have better communications. We have any number of things that are coming in there. Interestingly enough, radar did detect incoming Japanese planes, but the radar operators were not well trained, and command ignored their report, only to find out that they were right. Command thought that it was an incoming flight of B-17s that was supposed to be there, and it wasn't. It was the Japanese attack force. But these new technologies make it much, much easier for nations to do what's called project power. It's fairly easy to defend your coastline. It's easy to fight wars with your neighbors. It's much harder to fight wars half a globe away. The aircraft carrier, the airplane, amphibious technology, the ability to put troops, from a ship to shore easily and safely, heavier guns, all that stuff allows for a much greater ability to project power. And you can see that. I mean, the U.S. from its bases in Hawaii and Midway is able to retake Wake Island, is able to come down here and retake many of these islands. The bone ends of volcanoes, that's Iwo Jima. Taiwan, which is the invasion of Formosa, retaking the Philippines. All this the U.S. is able to do because it is able to get troops and planes into theater and keep them supplied, so much so that they're able to defeat a fairly well put together Navy in the Japanese Navy. Okay, so that's just a real quick and dirty summary of the Pacific War. Obviously, there's more in the book. Make sure you're reading, make sure you're taking good notes, but I wanted to throw some ideas at you today. All right, thank you very much.